you for your time. Enjoy your evening.
Thank you very much. So next up on our tonight's program, we have our keynote speaker, Dr. Leonard. Just to give you a brief introduction to him, we're very actually honored to have Dr. Leonard Sachs. He's very well accomplished in his field. He is actually an MD and also a PhD. Originally from Ohio, he went to MIT and graduated from MIT and then moved to Pennsylvania, where he finished his PhD in psychology and also did an MD in family medicine in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Since that time, he's taken a passion to deal with child and adolescent behaviors and has taken special courses regarding that, has met with multiple communities. He has 3 books that he's published as well, Why Gender Matters, Boys Adrift, and also Girls on the Edge. There are copies actually outside, next to the gymnasium on a table, so if you'd like to purchase them, you can, and I think Dr. Leonard Sachs will actually sign them for you as well, if you like. He's spoken on issues of child and adolescent development all around the country, and he's also appeared on many talk shows, premier talk shows such as CNN, PBS, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, New Zealand. So we're very, very pleased to have him. He's a great speaker, so please give him your undivided attention and a warm welcome.
All right, again, I want to thank everyone here who has given me the opportunity to meet with you, and also in Canton last night and this morning at the Islamic Association of Greater Detroit. I want to plunge right in. I want to compare the United States today with the United States 50 years ago. In making this comparison, I'm not suggesting that the United States 50 years ago didn't have problems. It did. The United States 50 years ago was racist and sexist to a much greater and more severe degree than it is today. Every era in history has its challenges, but I don't think there is sufficient recognition of the challenges of our own era. So I want to talk about immigrants to the United States 50 years ago. 50 years ago, there was good evidence that new immigrants to the United States who came to this country from overseas and who did not speak English at home, that their children were at higher risk for anxiety and depression and other bad outcomes compared with children born here. And good research on this point. And scholars concluded that when a new immigrant came to the United States and didn't speak English at home, that child should learn English, and the parents should learn English, and they should start speaking English at home, because the faster that child started speaking English and participated in American culture, the better the outcomes. The lower the risk of anxiety and depression, better achievement in school, and so forth. That was a robust finding 50 years ago, and that research was summarized in a monograph published by Oxford University Press. I've prepared an online handout. I'll say more about that in a moment, and you'll find the full citation to that Oxford University Press monograph in your handout. Because it was a robust empirical finding 50 years ago that learning to speak English, becoming part of American culture, becoming an American, improved outcomes for children. That's no longer true. On the contrary, today the reverse is true. Becoming American now greatly increases the risk of bad outcomes for children. And this is such a surprise to the scholars that they call it the immigrant paradox. Namely, that the children of immigrants, new immigrants to this country, now do better than the children of people born and raised in the United States. One way to conceptualize this research is to imagine two adjacent households. Two homes right next to each other, right here, same community. And the two households are identical in terms of family composition. Both households consist of a mother, father, teenage son, and teenage daughter. The household incomes are the same. The occupations of the parents are the same. The only difference between the two households is that in one household, the mother, father, son, and daughter were born and raised in the United States and speak English at home. In the adjacent home, the mother, father, son, and daughter were born and raised in India and speak Gujarati at home. Now, in which household are we more likely to find that the daughter is binge drinking, is cutting herself with razor blades, has been diagnosed with anxiety or depression, or has been diagnosed with an eating disorder? On each of that parameters, it is many times more likely that the girl born and raised in the United States who speaks English at home will have those problems compared to the girl who just arrived here. In which household is it more likely that the boy says school is a stupid waste of time, or the boy's been diagnosed with attention deficit disorder, or the boy's been arrested for street racing? On each of those parameters, it is many times more likely that the boy born and raised in the United States who speaks English at home will have those problems. The boy who just arrived from India is unlikely to have any of those problems. At least not in the first week or first month. But if he stays here, and especially if he starts speaking English at home, you get what doctors call a dose-response effect. American popular culture has become toxic to children. And by toxic, I mean that the longer you are exposed to it, the more likely you are to suffer a bad outcome in a dose-response way. The first week, the first month, that girl, that boy from India are very unlikely to have any of these bad outcomes. But if they stay here and they start speaking English at home, over time, over a year or 2 or 3, their risk will rise until after 4, 5, 6 years, it becomes close to the risk of the kid next door who was born and raised in the United States and who speaks English at home. Let's just look at some of those data. With regard to the diagnosis of attention deficit disorder, in 1979, fewer than 1% of American kids were treated for ADD. The most recent national data we have, 20% of teenage boys in this country and 10% of girls are treated for ADD. An American teenage boy is now 14 times more likely to be on medication for ADD compared with a British boy. An American child is now 40 times more likely to be diagnosed and treated for bipolar disorder compared to a child in Europe. Rates in Asia are even lower than rates in Europe. So I've prepared a handout for you. I'm going to mention many scholarly studies and citations. You will find all those citations in the handout. The handout is my name, leonardsachs.com/IAGD. That stands for Islamic Association of Greater Detroit. IAGD.pdf. It's case sensitive and it is all lowercase, and you must include the www and the .pdf. And it's online now, but you don't need it now. And in fact, I'd encourage you not to pull it up right now because it's not designed for a mobile phone. It's designed for a full-size desktop. The print is not large. The function of the handout is to save you the trouble of taking notes. The handout is essentially the notes I would take if I were attending, plus the citations, the scholarly citations. So you shouldn't need to write down very much. One of the questions I'll try to answer this evening is what happened. In 1965, kids who came to this country were better off if they became American, if they started speaking English at home and assimilated into the popular culture. That is not true today. Today, becoming American is a major risk factor for anxiety, depression, drug and alcohol use, disengagement from school, and many other bad outcomes. Hence the immigrant paradox. The children of immigrants who don't speak English at home, who hang on to their native culture, are better off physically and psychologically than kids born and raised in the United States. Why did that happen? And what can we do about it as parents? If you're staying here, and especially if you speak English at home, as I do, what do you need to do to protect your child from these bad outcomes that now increasingly affect American children? To get a handle on what happened and what we need to do as parents, I think it's helpful to begin by talking with a comparative anthropologist. Comparative anthropologists, people who have spent their lives studying how different people have lived in different times and different places. And I myself had the privilege of consulting with David Gilmore, professor of comparative anthropology at the State University of New York at Stony Brook. And I said to him, talk to me about cultures that last. Cultures that have endured for thousands of years. Do enduring cultures have anything in common? If you ask that question in terms of the food they eat, the foods they're not permitted to eat, the clothes they wear, or their religious beliefs, the answer is no. On those parameters, there is nothing that all enduring cultures share. But there is one thing that all enduring cultures share, according to the anthropologist. Every culture that lasts has strong bonds of respect across generations, and that is a universal. It is true of every culture that lasts. So this is a photograph of Kinalda among the Navajo. Let's talk about two enduring cultures. The Navajo, the native people of southwestern United States, and Orthodox Jews. These are two cultures that have been around for thousands of years, that have endured for thousands of years. And they have nothing in common in terms of what they eat, what they're prohibited from eating, how they dress, or what their religious beliefs are. That's why I choose them, is because they're so different on those parameters. But they do share strong bonds across generations. So Kinalda, if you know only a little about the Navajo and someone asks you, what's Kinalda? You would answer, Kinalda is a rite of passage. When a Navajo girl has her first menstrual period, she stays at the home of her grandmother for 4 days and 4 nights. And during those 4 days and 4 nights, all of her adult female relatives call on her, aunts and cousins. And she demonstrates to them that she has indeed mastered the arts and crafts of Kinalda. Mom doesn't play much role. It's not her mom who's taught her. It's the grandmothers and women of the grandmother's generation who do most of the teaching. When I say strong bonds across generations, I'm not just talking about mother-daughter or father-son. I'm talking about a community of women for girls and a community of men for boys. So you may have heard about bar mitzvah, rite of passage for a Jewish boy at age 13. But if you're not connected to people in the Orthodox Jewish community, you may not know that in the Orthodox Jewish community, every element of religious life is single sex. You have the women and girls here, there's a barrier, and the men and boys over there. As you may know, every Saturday in an Orthodox Jewish synagogue, They read from a prescribed portion of the 5 books of Moses, and that calendar is synchronized worldwide. You can go to any synagogue on the planet in an Orthodox community on a Saturday morning, and you know what they'll be reading. When they get to the end of that cycle, and they finish the last chapter of Deuteronomy, and next Saturday they'll start over with Genesis 1:1, that night all the men, and only the men, stay up traditionally dusk till dawn, singing and dancing. That's the photograph at upper right there. You have older men with younger men with boys. A community of men teach the boys, this is what it means to be a Jewish man. A community of women teach the girls, this is what it means to be a Jewish woman. Now, what is being taught? The content differs completely from one culture to the next. What the Jewish girl is being taught doesn't overlap at all with what the Navajo girl is being taught. They're being taught completely different cultures. The content is totally different, but the process is precisely the same. In every enduring culture, you have strong bonds across generations. You have a community of women for girls and a community of men for boys. We used to have that too. By we, I mean North American secular Anglophone. North American English speakers who were not Amish, Mennonite, or Hutterite. Amish, Mennonite, and Hutterite still have it, but secular meaning not Amish, Mennonite, or Hutterite. We used to have that kind of community, and this has been documented extensively by many scholars, most notably Robert Putnam and his colleagues at Harvard. So Dr. Putnam has spent more than 20 years now, he and his students, documenting how these bonds across generations were robust in this country 50 years ago and have collapsed. That's the word he uses. So 50 years ago, he and his students have documented you could go into any neighborhood, and certainly this is true throughout southeastern Michigan. You could go into any neighborhood and you could go to any block and find a sewing circle. And his students actually dug up who was in the sewing circle right here in 1965. Who were those women? Well, there was this 63-year-old woman, this 49-year-old woman, this 27-year-old woman, this 17-year-old girl, and this 13-year-old girl were in the sewing circle. Organized not by kin relation, but by geographic proximity, which is a fancy way of saying, I'm sorry, I thought I turned that off. Organized not by kin relation, but by geographic proximity. Meaning that they weren't related to one another. They were just neighbors. A robust community of women for girls. Likewise, 50 years ago, you could go around any neighborhood on a Saturday afternoon and you could find informal associations. You could find a bunch of men working under the hood of a car. And again, Dr. Putnam and his colleagues have dug up who were those men. And you find again, you had a man who's 70, a man who's 50, a man who's 30, a 16-year-old boy, and a 12-year-old boy. Today you might drive around the neighborhood and you might see 2 old geezers working under the hood of their 1965 Corvette, but the boys are not with them. The teenage boys are not with them. The teenage boys are inside playing video games. The bonds across generations have been broken. 50 years ago, bowling was more popular in the United States than it is today, but more importantly, from Dr. Putnam's perspective, it was done differently. 50 years ago, most of the bowling that happened in the United States was in bowling leagues. And Tuesday night was the women's night, and Thursday night was the men's night. And again, Dr. Putnam and his colleagues dug up who was in the bowling league, right here. in 1965. And you find, well, this woman was 66, this woman was 51, this woman was 35, this girl was 18, and this girl was 14. Kids in the United States still go bowling, but they go bowling alone, the title of Dr. Putnam's best-known book. Meaning 14-year-olds still go bowling, but they don't go bowling with a community of women. They go bowling with other 14-year-olds, girls and boys mixed together, which as far as Dr. Putnam is concerned, is bowling alone. The bonds across generations have been broken. The subtitle of his book is The Collapse and Revival of American Community. The collapse refers to what he's actually observed. The revival refers to what he hopes might perhaps occur at some point in the unspecified future. 50 years ago, respect for parents was a characteristic of American popular culture. The popular culture taught and endorsed respect for parents. And the most popular TV shows of that era, TV shows like Father Knows Best, My Three Sons, The Andy Griffith Show. The parents in those most popular shows were consistently reliable, competent, caring, and productive. American culture today, the popular culture in which kids are being raised, actively teaches disrespect for parents. In writing my fourth book, The Collapse of Parenting, I used Nielsen ratings to get a list of the 150 most popular TV shows in the United States. Not one of them consistently depicts a parent as competent, reliable, productive. The most successful television comedy in American history and currently broadcast is The Simpsons. More than 500 episodes. Homer Simpson is a bump. In one episode you get to see inside his brain, which has 3 major drives: sleep, donuts, and beer. Now I'm not taking this show to task. I don't see these shows as causes so much as I see them as symptoms. And I actually think the writers of this show have great insight into what's happened in the United States. And it's not just this show. You look at all the popular TV shows, Modern Family. The straight male dad is consistently an idiot, clueless, out of touch, bungling. You go over to the Disney Channel, which is supposedly family-friendly programming, but it's not. Dog with a blog. The parents, the father is a school psychologist who knows nothing about children, about what they want or need or understand. The dog has much greater insight into the behavior of children than the father does, which is the rather tired laugh line of the show. Liv and Maddie, another Disney hit, features another school psychologist, this time the mother, who again knows nothing about children and who reliably engenders the well-deserved scorn of her daughters because she has no clue. What does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a gentleman? Well, 40 years ago, boys knew what you meant because the popular culture taught it. The TV shows taught it. The most popular movies taught it in the heroic characters played by actors like Paul Newman, Sidney Poitier, Gary Cooper. They knew what you meant. So I was meeting with freshmen at Wabash College in Indiana, and I asked them, would anyone care to raise their hand and tell me what it means to be a gentleman? And one of the boys shot up his hand, and I called him, and he said, being a gentleman means you go to gentlemen's clubs and watch women take their clothes off. I said, all right, that's very amusing and funny, but Now, would you care to offer a more serious thought about what it means? And they really have nothing to offer. Another boy said, well, it means you wear a three-piece suit. It's all about surface. But again, I don't really blame the boys. How should they know? They have not been taught. They haven't been raised in the culture of Sidney Poitier, Gary Cooper, Paul Newman. They've been raised in the culture of Akon, 50 Cent, Eminem, Justin Timberlake, Justin Bieber. How are they supposed to know what it means to be a gentleman? They have no guidance. Boys are not born with this knowledge. They can't be, because it varies from one culture to the next, and it varies radically. What it meant to be a good man in Japan from the Tokugawa shogunate in 1603 to Meiji Restoration of 1868, the era of the samurai, that's profoundly different from what it meant to be a good man in the United States in 1960. Boys are not born with this knowledge, and they don't naturally acquire it. They have to be taught. And if we don't teach them, they turn to the marketplace. Boys want to know, what does it mean to be a man? Girls want to know, what does it mean to be a woman? And if we don't teach them, they will look to the marketplace. And the marketplace fills the void. And the American marketplace used to be a healthy place. That's Sam Cooke. 50 years ago, he had a #1 hit song in this country. He sang, "Don't know much about history." He sang, "Now, I don't claim to be an A student, but I'm trying to be. Because maybe by being an A student, baby, I could win your love for me." He goes on to mention French, geometry, and trigonometry as subjects in which he's going to work harder to try to earn an A instead of a B, because he believes that by earning an A instead of a B in trigonometry, he can raise his status in the eyes of the pretty girl. That was American culture 50 years ago. This was a #1 hit song. It's inconceivable to imagine Justin Bieber, Akon, Eminem singing a song without irony about how they're going to try harder to get an A instead of a B on their geometry quiz. But in that culture, it was not unusual. 50 years ago, American popular culture was the culture of John Lennon, Paul McCartney, Simon and Garfunkel. That's not the culture in which American kids are growing up today. They're growing up in a culture of disrespect. That's the title of chapter 1 of my book, The Collapse of Parenting, the culture of disrespect. And when I talk about the culture of disrespect, I don't mean merely that American popular culture now teaches kids to be disrespectful to adults, although it does. I mean also that American popular culture teaches kids to be disrespectful to one another. Here's Justin Bieber giving the finger to his own fans. Miley Cyrus, Detroit's own Eminem. American kids now wear t-shirts with slogans like, "Do I look like I care?" Or "I'm not shy, I just don't like you." Or "I'm out of your league." You do not see these t-shirts outside of North America. I have spoken and visited more than 40 schools across Australia, also New Zealand, England, Scotland, Switzerland, Germany, Italy, Spain. You do not see you do see these t-shirts occasionally in Scotland or Switzerland. When you do, and you go up to the kid wearing the t-shirt, you find out without exception, in my experience, that that kid is an American on holiday. Kids who live in Scotland don't see anything funny about a t-shirt that says, "I'm not shy, I just don't like you." To a kid in Scotland, that's not funny, it's just crass and rude. Why would you wear such a thing? Only Americans do that. Because only in the United States Canada is a special case, I'm not going to talk about this evening, but in the United States, you have this culture of disrespect, and American parents buy these things for their kids. They think they're funny. So when I began, I said, one of the questions I'm going to answer is, why did this happen? America used to be a safe and healthy place to raise kids. It no longer is. Becoming American is now a risk factor. Why? What happened? One thing that happened was that American popular culture became the culture of disrespect, and that is harmful. But that's not the only thing that happened. That's not the whole story. That's a piece of the story. Another important piece is video games. So Craig Anderson and Doug Gentile are two researchers who've done more than anyone else in the world to study who is playing video games and what are the consequences of playing video games. And one of their most robust findings is that girls and boys tend to play different video games, and they tend to play them differently. So a few years ago, Farmville was big for girls on the iPhone. It was very popular, mostly among girls. Farmville has pretty much gone away. Right now, the most popular video game for girls is Candy Crush. Candy Crush is a free game, costs nothing to install on your device. Last year, it earned over $1 billion, billion with a B. How is that possible? It costs nothing to acquire the game. Well, it costs nothing to acquire the game, it costs nothing to get through the first 30 levels or so, but after about level 30, things get slow, and it's harder to progress. And finally, you just get stuck. And the game lets you know that what you need to get to the next level is this little doohickey, which will cost you 99 cents. And each day, roughly 3 million players, mostly girls and women, shell out that 99 cents. The game earns more than $3 million a day, every day. That's how you get to over $1 billion a year. Girls substantially outnumber boys among those who've reached level 100 in the game, and greatly outnumber boys among those who've reached level 1000. The most popular video games for American boys are, number 1, Grand Theft Auto, number 2, Call of Duty, and then World of Warcraft and Halo. These are first-person shooter games. But Anderson and Gentile find not only that girls and boys tend to play different games, but they play them differently. The average girl who's playing Candy Crush spends maybe 20 minutes in a session. The average boy playing Call of Duty or Grand Theft Auto spends about 2.5 hours in a session. So I was speaking at a high school to students about the effects of playing these video games, referring to them as games. And one boy very politely raised his hand and said, "Excuse me." He said, "Call of Duty is not